The Russian war is still going on with all of its bloody savagery. Both sides are increasingly using more powerful and substantial weapons in their assaults on one another. The Bakhmut front is the area of the conflict that has seen the most intense fighting, and the Ukrainian army is currently conducting shooting training in the area. On the other hand, mortars are being used to attack the Russian military forces. In a statement, Zelensky warned that Putin, who can smell blood, would become more aggressive toward us if we withdrew from Bakhmut. It then proceeds with its attacks by saying that we will never permit this to happen. Within the context of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which has been going on for approximately 14 months, the number of Russian casualties keeps climbing in the city of Bakhmut. The front line in the Donetsk region is still the site of the fiercest fighting as of this writing. Soldiers from the 80th Mortar Battalion of the Ukrainian Army who have been assigned to the Bakhmut front, which is home to some of the worst fighting in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, continue their shooting practice even as they take part in the fierce fighting. A place where the battle in Ukraine was almost locked, particularly on Avdiivka and Marinka and on the Bakhmut front, which is known as the hottest spot, became Bakhmut, which was surrounded by Russian forces from three sides, and the inner city clashes persisted. The growing number of military operations carried out by Ukrainian forces has garnered a lot of attention. A command post and 3 enemy concentration locations were all destroyed by rocket and artillery fire from the Ukrainian side. According to the report that was given by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the missile and artillery units were successful in hitting an enemy command post, as well as 3 places where enemy manpower, weapons, and military equipment were concentrated, and an electronic warfare station that was controlled by the enemy. In addition, planes belonging to the Ukrainian Air Force carried out 5 airstrikes on the areas where Russian military personnel and equipment were concentrated, inflicting consecutive blows on Russia in return. The Russian army continues to focus the majority of its efforts on conducting offensive operations in the Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Marinka directions. However, the Ukrainian forces were able to successfully counter these attacks and fend off 40 separate assaults by the enemy. It appears that the Ukrainian army is conducting a significant amount of military activity in the direction of Bakhmut. Sounds of continuous explosions can be heard coming from the region, where tracked tanks and other armored vehicles transporting infantry are moving at a fast rate of speed. The concentration of Ukrainian soldiers who came together at various parts of the front and entered Bakhmut, where inner-city clashes were intensifying, demonstrates how fierce war operations are continuing in this city. These soldiers came together at various points of the front and entered Bakhmut. A brigade assembled at one point on the front and prepared to participate in the ongoing ST battles in Bakhmut, providing information on the state of affairs in the area. They claimed that it is only possible to reach Bakhmut by using their armored vehicles because the roads are continually under attack. Additionally, they added that the preparation of guns and other equipment must be finished before the soldiers may approach the front line. We are going to battle for the victory for as long as it takes, just like their other compatriots. We are going to fight right up until the very end. Everything will work out perfectly. We are in complete command of the situation. On the other hand, despite the best efforts of the Russian army, the front line, which spans around 1,000 kilometers, has not experienced any significant shifts in position for some months. Additionally, we are able to say that the counteroffensive that will be conducted by the Ukrainian army is anticipated to start. Since the 24th of February of the previous year, the war that has been going on in Ukraine has been preparing for a counteroffensive. The idea put forth by Kiev is to put an end to the occupation by launching a robust offensive against Russia at the front. The Western nations will contribute tanks and battleships, both of which will play a significant role in the counterattack. The timing of the offensive that the Ukrainian army plans to launch in the east and south of the country will be dictated not only by the weather but also by how far along the army is in its preparations. When the temperatures rise in the spring, the frozen ground that was present during the winter transforms into a swamp. Because of this condition, the movement of armed troops is severely restricted. The Ukrainian army, having learned from the mistake that the Russian army made, is waiting for the weather to warm up in the coming weeks and for the land to become ideal for large-scale operations by armed units before beginning the spring offensive. The Ukrainian army has learned from the mistake that the Russian army made. In this regard, it was suggested that the counterattack of the Ukrainian army could commence either during the second half of the month of April or in the month of May. During this time, Western countries' military assistance to Ukraine has been steadily growing. There have been reports that Ukraine has received some of the 100 Leopard 2 tanks that have been promised to the country by a total of 12 different countries. Training for Ukrainians on the operation of these tanks is being conducted at an accelerated pace in a number of different nations. In addition to this, Poland made the decision to provide Ukraine with 60 updated T-72 tanks in addition to the 250 Soviet-style T-72 tanks of an older model that it had already sent. The Ukrainian government believes that the use of mechanized forces will be crucial to their success in breaching the Russian lines. In addition, Western countries are providing mine-clearing trucks, mobile bridges, and mine-shielded vehicles in preparation for a potential attack. These are all extremely vital pieces of equipment. At the end of the previous year, the proportion of weapons in Ukraine's inventory that adhered to Soviet standards compared to those that adhered to NATO standards was 5-1. And it is anticipated that this ratio will approach 5-2 in the near future, with fresh assistance from the Western world. To put it another way, approximately one-third of Ukraine's arsenal will be comprised of weapons produced in accordance with NATO specifications. In the not-too-distant future, as part of the overall plan for the Great Offensive, Ukraine plans to advance to Melitopol through Zaporizhia. After that, they intend to cut off Russia's land connection with Crimea by conquering Berdyansk Yevgeny, which is the head of the Wagner Group in the Prigozhin region. Also claims that the Ukrainian army has amassed 80,000 soldiers around Bakhmut and that after besieging the Wagner forces in Bakhmut, Ukraine intends to reach the Black Sea via Zaporizhia. In addition to this, it is anticipated that Ukraine will conduct an amphibious operation in the direction of Crimea through the crossing. There is also the possibility of Ukraine beginning an offensive to the east and then moving south in order to cut off Russia's land connection when it has finished its offensive. On the other hand, it is not feasible to know for certain in advance in which direction the Ukrainian army will begin an offensive before it happens. During the autumn attack of 2022, Ukraine created the appearance that it would put weight on Kherson in the south. Nonetheless, it surprised the Russians by mounting a successful raid on Kharkiv in the north. As a result of these developments, the Russian army is already making preparations for a defensive position prior to their assault on Ukraine. As a result of this situation, the Russian army has constructed minefields and trenches at numerous locations along the 1,000-kilometer front. The use of satellite imagery reveals that Russia is also constructing new lines of defense behind the front lines of the conflict. The Russian army is using trench digging equipment to dig trenches in the northern part of the Crimean Peninsula. They are also digging tank trenches and laying dragon teeth in an effort to impede the progress of Ukrainian tanks. On the other side, the Russian army has prepared for the possibility of an amphibious invasion by digging a trench that is 30 kilometers long along the beaches of Vitino in Crimea, which is located 160 kilometers south of Kherson and is controlled by the Ukrainians. Along the same lines, the Russians excavated a second trench that was approximately 70 kilometers long between the cities of Melitopol and Berdyansk on the shore of the Black Sea. After all, the ultimate objective for Ukraine is to reclaim all of its territory that is currently under Russian occupation. These extensive defensive lines, which will reach as far as Crimea by the summer, are evidence of how worried Russia is about the possibility of a counteroffensive being launched against it. Given the circumstances, it is clear that the Russians are concerned about losing even the portion of Crimea that they annexed in 2014. This is in addition to the territories that they have gained since the beginning of the conflict. Because Ukraine still held out hope that it could win the conflict and regain control of its territory through military action, the country has thus far been unwilling to engage in peace negotiations with Russia. And its aspiration to participate in peace negotiations, which could begin at some point in the future thanks to the victories it has achieved on the ground. The fact that preparations are being made by both sides demonstrates that the conflict in Ukraine will get more intense in the months to come. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to keep up with the latest breaking news and developments. Bottom below, what is the most essential function that a human being should fulfill? This subject has been discussed by philosophers for ages. It wasn't until the expansion of scientific knowledge and psychological understanding that it became obvious that there was a conclusive response to this topic. Survival is the number one priority for every single human being. Regarding this matter, safety and protection come in at number one. After that, the rest of the things follow in order. This is also true for those serving in the military. Soldiers care a tremendous deal about surviving, given the high likelihood that they will be killed in combat. No soldier wants to die. But what happens when soldiers realize they cannot win this war and that they will ultimately perish as a result of their participation? The Russian military stationed in Ukraine is unaware of this fact. The result is that the Russian army is falling apart as a result of this. The Ukrainian army has begun taking Russian soldiers who are willing to surrender. An extremely significant statement was issued by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense in regard to the surrender of Russian servicemen. Our team at the Daily News is looking into the matter concerning the Russian armed forces. If you're ready, let's get this party started. To begin, it is a well-established truth that the soldiers serving in the Russian army are going through a period of intense terror. The Russian military is taking a severe beating in Ukraine at the hands of its opponents. The mental health of Russian service members is rapidly deteriorating as a result. Before the outbreak of this war, the Kremlin was continually disseminating propaganda. Those Russian soldiers who paid attention to statements made by the Kremlin believed that this war would be very simple. They believed that the Ukrainian people would demonstrate their affection for the Russian soldiers and that this would lead the Ukrainian army to capitulate. However, they were taken aback by the Ukrainian army. A significant loss was inflicted on the Russian army as a result of the heroic fight displayed by the Ukrainian army. Heavy casualties were sustained by the Russian troops across all fronts, but particularly in the Bakhmut region, which served as a graveyard for the Russian army. The occupation of this territory by Russian troops was a learning experience. The Russian army, on the other hand, was forced to suffer a devastating loss as a consequence of the resistance offered by the Ukrainian army. The Russian military planned to pull its troops out of this region. However, Putin had issued directives that this region had to be taken control of. As a consequence of this, the Russian army carried on with its operations. Nevertheless, each and every operation resulted in the deaths of a considerable number of Russian soldiers. The Russian soldiers started to feel as though their friends had been sacrificed for nothing. They were aware that if the conflict in this region persisted, it would result in the deaths of thousands of Russian soldiers. As a result, they attempted to exert pressure on their superiors. Those Russian soldiers who sought to flee the battlefield were met with severe discipline from their superiors. As a direct consequence of this, the level of friction that existed between the Russian leaders and the soldiers rose to an even higher level. The Russian soldiers ceased following the commands given to them by their commanders. Even if the issue of disobedience inside the Russian army became even more widespread, the Russian soldiers were of the opinion that something had to be done about it. During this time, a new topic of conversation emerged within the Russian army. The Ukrainian government's initiative, I Want to Live, provided tens of thousands of Russian soldiers with a glimmer of redemption through its I Want to Live effort. Those Russian soldiers who were willing to capitulate participated in this project. That action was taken by the soldiers stationed in the Bakhmut region. Russian soldiers who made contact with Ukrainian forces devised a covert strategy to discreetly surrender. As members of the Engadili reporting team, we do not believe that it is appropriate to reveal the secret plot. As a result, we will wait until the battle is done before we share any information regarding this matter. The Russian soldiers devised a unique strategy in order to surrender. The Russian military personnel all intend to surrender on separate days. The government of Ukraine established a secure passageway through which Russian soldiers could surrender. Within a span of 2 weeks, the Ukrainian army accepted the surrender of hundreds of Russian soldiers. According to Vitaly Matalenko, a spokeswoman for the I Want to Live hotline, the number of registered callers from Russian soldiers to surrender has doubled to 3,000 over the course of the past month. The Ministry of Defense of Ukraine has also reported that there has been a significant increase in the number of Russian soldiers that have surrendered. According to the opinions of many Ukrainian specialists, these figures are only going to climb more in the future. The majority of Russian soldiers who have surrendered recently have done so out of fear of an operation carried out by the Ukrainian military. The Russian troops' morale is suffering as a direct result of the recent reports that the Ukrainian army is getting ready to undertake a big operation. On the other hand, experts are of the opinion that this number will continue to grow. When the Ukrainian army finally begins its major onslaught, it is anticipated that thousands of additional Russian soldiers will surrender. I Want to Live's official spokesman, Vitaly Medivenko, is quoted in this article. Said that the number of registered callers from Russian soldiers to surrender had increased to 3,000 during the course of the previous month. Because of the constantly declining number of soldiers serving in the Russian army, Vladimir Putin has become highly irate as a result of the enormous number of Russian soldiers who have given up their positions. Each day, the Ukrainian army is responsible for the deaths or surrenders of hundreds of Russian soldiers. As a direct consequence of this, the number of soldiers serving in the Russian army is steadily declining. In order for Putin to win this battle, he needs additional soldiers. However, Putin does not have any more troops available to send to Ukraine. As you are aware, Vladimir Putin had earlier declared a mobilization order to enlist a total of 300,000 young people in the Russian armed forces. On the other hand, this move was met with intense opposition in Russia. The population of Russia has no desire to fight for Putin. The number of people participating in the demonstrations in Russia increased to the point where Putin began to worry that the Kremlin palace would be attacked. There is currently anarchy in Russia. Putin needs more troops. However, he is hesitant to issue another call for mobilization. Putin is under the impression that a significant uprising will break out across the country in the event that he calls for a mobilization. But Putin will not be victorious in this conflict until he declares a mobilization. More people are required to serve in the Russian army. It is now abundantly evident that the Ukrainian army is in a position of clear advantage over the Russian army. This aspect of the war is emphasized in every report that has been written. Even Russian military personnel believe that Ukraine will emerge victorious from this conflict. The Ukraine has been successful in achieving a psychological advantage. The Ukrainian forces are highly courageous, in contrast to the scared Russian soldiers. The Ukrainian military is certain that they will emerge victorious from this conflict. Without a doubt, they will not be afraid to put up a valiant fight for this cause. Always respectful of his troops, Ukrainian President Zelensky is seen here doing so. Medals are given out to valiant soldiers serving in the Ukrainian army, and the significance of the soldiers' roles is frequently underlined. Additionally, there is unwavering support for the army among the Ukrainian people. Women in Ukraine give some of their meals to the Ukrainian military. The nation as a whole maintains an extremely high level of cohesiveness. Because of this camaraderie, Ukrainian soldiers are able to keep up their valiant defense of their country. However, there is an additional effect. The Russian military personnel are always making an effort to be informed. Due to the fact that the Russian people do not support the Russian army, Russian soldiers are taken aback by the level of camaraderie that exists in Ukraine. The people of Russia are holding demonstrations, demanding that their soldiers come back home as quickly as they can. The demonstrators in Russia are demanding that the country's armed forces come back home as quickly as they can. As the Russian soldiers watch their comrades lose the will and the courage to fight, they themselves come to the realization that this battle is no longer a heroic one. Because of this, surrender occurred much more quickly. Putin will be unable to maintain control of his forces if Russian soldiers continue to capitulate in large numbers. Russian soldiers continue to command the front lines and surrender to the Ukrainian army in several places. The Russian army is seeing a precipitous decline in the number of those serving in active duty positions. What are your thoughts on the fact that Russian soldiers have surrendered? In what ways do you believe this alters the trajectory of the war? In your opinion, what do you believe to be the primary factor that led to the capitulation of Russian soldiers? Do you believe that Vladimir Putin will order another mobilization? Remember to give us your feedback and to share your thoughts with us. Keep up with us here for further updates. Every day, the level of violence in the fighting in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine gets a little bit worse. Whereas the Ukrainian army is currently preparing for an offensive of its own. The Russian army has moved into defensive positions across a wide swath of the country. During the process of invading Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin has been confronted with a number of developments that he had previously sidestepped. These developments have strengthened the position of the Ukrainian army and cornered the invading forces. Russia is not making good progress in this conflict. The Ukrainian army, which has been bolstered by the military assistance of Western and European countries, is successfully attacking the Russian army in an effort to drive them out of the country. As a result of the assaults by the Ukrainian army, Putin's army is running out of ammunition at the same time that it is having trouble recruiting men to take part in the plan to invade Ukraine. Every day, the Russian army suffers from increasing levels of fatigue. Even though it has not yet begun the assault for which it has been preparing, the Ukrainian army is still engaged in hostilities against Russian aggressors. This preparation for the spring offensive has been going on for quite some time. In fact, the assaults that the Ukrainian army has been launching over the past few days provide hints about the scope of the spring onslaught. In recent days, the Ukrainian army has been effective in carrying out operations aimed at Russian invaders and the weaponry they have brought with them. On the same day, dozens of invading forces stationed in various places were attacked, and 7 draws controlled by the invaders were put out of commission. Additionally, images of a destroyed BMP infantry fighting vehicle belonging to the Russian invaders were distributed by the Army of Eugenia. The Ukrainian defense forces were able to intercept and destroy the incoming missiles fired by the Russian army. As the Taylor News team, we will continue to keep you updated on the latest events in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Our staff, which works with the notion that media should be honest and objective, makes an effort to keep up with all the changes in the war, which has recently increased its severity. To show your support for our staff, simply click the Super Things button that's been provided below. Together, let's break down the most recent information coming from the front lines. Over the course of the last day, the Eugenian army has carried out 4 assaults on the regions that are being occupied by Russian occupation troops. The Russian invaders suffered further casualties as a result of their attacks during the conflict. The Ukrainian army's artillery and rocket units have been focusing their fire on strategic areas that have been occupied by the Russian military. This attack resulted in great losses for the invader, who was defeated as a result. A Russian battalion suffered damage to 2 checkpoints, an ammo storage facility, and an air defense system as a result of rocket and artillery fire. The destruction of an army's ammunition stockpile and air defense systems is a significant setback. In fact, an increase in these losses can have an effect that is significant enough to alter the overall trajectory of the conflict. Ammo is without a doubt the most essential commodity required for victory in battle. This is because the loss of an army's ammo stockpile is analogous to a person struggling with their ability to eat and drink. Armies are in a bind because they do not have sufficient supplies of guns, explosives, and other equipment. The Russian army, which is losing more ammunition depots every day as a result of successful strikes by the Ukrainian army, continues to be surrounded by the question of equipment and ammunition. The Ukrainian army has been effective in its operations. The air defense systems were one of the main pieces of equipment that were taken from the Russian army when they were attacked by the Ukrainian army the other day. The attack was orchestrated by the Ukrainian army. These technologies are absolutely necessary in today's warfare due to the fact that airstrikes are significantly more successful than land or sea assaults. When compared to the effect of a missile being fired at an adversary, the impact of an army unit consisting of dozens of soldiers is significantly lower. Despite the fact that the Russian military is aware of the significance of this comparison, it is unable to safeguard its air defense systems. It is possible for the Ukrainian army to destroy the air defense systems used by the Russian invaders using the weaponry that is being chased from nations lower than Europe by the Ukrainian army. In contrast to the Connecticut and other air defense systems that are being depleted by the Russian army, the air defense systems that are being utilized by the Ukrainian army are performing exceptionally well. Over the course of the past day, 21 of the 23 Russian Kh-101 Kh-555 cruise missiles that were launched by the Russian invaders were successfully disabled by Ukrainian air defense systems. In any case, Larry Zaluzhny, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, claimed that Russian Tu-95 aircraft had fired missiles against Ukrainian troops when they were stationed over the Caspian Sea at approximately 4 in the morning. Zaluzny also said in a statement that anti-aircraft missile units were responsible for the destruction of 21 of 23 Kh-101 Kh-555 cruise missiles and 2 UAVs of operational tactical level. The statement was posted on a Telegram account. It is currently impossible to report on successful strikes carried out by the Ukrainian army in coordination with the air defense systems of the Ukrainian Air Force. This is due to the fact that the number of attacks carried out by the Ukrainian army is increasing on a daily basis. It's possible that the Russian invaders may soon be rendered helpless as a result of these attacks. A few days ago, the air assault forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine updated their Telegram account with a new message. This post contained photographs of 2 Russian BMP tanks that had been destroyed during the conflict. The following was stated in a post that was made on the Telegram account of the Air Assault Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The incompetent Russian forces continue to make attempts to breach our defensive lines and take control of the Luhansk region. Every day, members of the 25th Separate Suggest Airborne Brigade of the Air Assault Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine fight attacks from the enemy with confidence, reducing enemy combat vehicles and their infamous Oldeners to scrap metal in the process. It is hardly possible to convey the scale of the Russian army's casualties in a written report. Even the losses that were incurred in just 1 or 2 days resulted in pages of paperwork. In addition to the 7 drones that were neutralized by the Ukrainian army, the Zola 421 drones that were neutralized by the Ukrainian army in the Castle region are of utmost significance. The following is an excerpt from a telegraph post that was distributed by the Ukrainian National Guard and describes how this drone was used. This technology is frequently utilized by Russian military forces for the purposes of reconnaissance and control of territory, conducting a search and destroying the targets, keeping an eye on the transfer of military equipment. At the same time that the Russian army is suffering increasing casualties, the Ukrainian army is preparing for a thorough supreme attack. The greatest offensive has been on the list of priorities for a considerable amount of time. Because of this, a significant number of Ukrainians are interested in taking part in the conflict, even though they have never been on the front lines. At a press conference held in Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov offered up some fresh commentary regarding the upcoming spring offensive. According to Reznikov, the Ukrainian armed forces are currently preparing for the upcoming offensive with all of their teams, and these preparations will very soon be finished. According to Reznikov, the preparations are nearing completion since, in addition to weapons and military equipment, our military troops need to be trained on how to use the weapons and equipment and must be able to employ them. We have been provided with systems that are up to date. It is only a matter of time before the Ukrainian armed forces begin their onslaught for the spring season. With this offensive, the goal of the Ukrainian army is to retake all of the territory that the Russian invaders have taken over in Ukraine. In response to the spring attack, the Russian army established defensive positions and dug trenches, which led to an increase in the number of casualties suffered by the Russian army. Even before the operation began, the Russian army had already sustained significant losses since the beginning of the war, and these losses continued to worsen even as the offensive got underway. Since the beginning of the occupation, the Russian army has suffered the following casualties: 189,460 members of the armed forces, 3,694 tanks, 7,181 armored combat vehicles, 2,905 artillery systems, 543 reactive spread fire systems, 294 air defense systems, 308 aircraft, 294 helicopters, and 5,819 pieces of automotive and tank equipment, 18 military ships and boats, 911 cruise missiles, 2,467 unmanned area vehicles, and 353 specialized machines for operational tactical missile systems are all part of the military's arsenal. It is believed that Russian leader Vladimir Putin will not be able to put up much opposition against the Ukrainian army as a result of these losses. What kinds of ideas do you have? Is it possible for the Russian army to make a full recovery? Will the spring offensive by the Ukrainian army have an effect on how the war is fought? We are interested in hearing your point of view. Keep up with us here for further updates.